The guard tower lights at Fort Halcyon burned a dull amber against the night, the kind of light that flattened everything it touched: faces, uniforms, intentions. Midnight inspections always did that. They stripped color from the world and left only shapes and rules. Private First Class. Daniel Mercer stood at Checkpoint Charlie with his rifle slung tight, boots planted exactly shoulder-width apart. He was 22 years old, 3 months out of basic, and already learning the most important lesson the Army never put in a manual. Most mistakes don't come from malice. They come from obedience without thinking. The radio on his vest crackled. Charlie 1, stand by. Unscheduled arrival inbound. Civilian status unclear. Mercer didn't move. He didn't answer until his heartbeat settled. Charlie 1 standing by. A black government sedan rolled into view. Headlights low, engine whispering instead of roaring. No convoy, no escorts. That alone made Mercer uneasy. Nothing important ever traveled alone on a base like this. The vehicle stopped precisely at the painted line. The driver stepped out first. Male, mid-40s, contractor haircut, eyes that scanned like he'd done this before. Then the rear door opened. The woman who stepped out didn't look like anything special. That was what unsettled Mercer most. She wore civilian slacks, dark jacket, no visible insignia, hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no jewelry. Her posture, however, was wrong for a civilian. Too balanced, too still, like gravity worked harder on her than everyone else. She handed over a plain manila folder. "Good evening," she said calmly. "I'm here on orders." Mercer took the folder, flipping it open under the checkpoint light. No base pass, no CAC card, just a sealed document stamped, restricted, do not duplicate. He felt his stomach tighten. "I'll need you to wait here, ma'am," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Protocol," she nodded once. No argument, no irritation. That was mistake number 1. Civilians always complained. Mercer radioed it in. Within minutes, the air changed. 2 MPs arrived. Then a third, then Staff Sergeant Colin Rourke, the shift NCOIC, a man who believed rules were weapons and enjoyed using them. Rourke took the folder, skimmed it, and frowned. "This doesn't authorize base access," he said flatly. "No ID, no escort, no clearance we can verify." The woman met his eyes. Hers didn't flicker. "It authorizes a Level 7 audit of detention and security procedures," she replied. "Your command will recognize the signature," Rourke scoffed. "At 2 in the morning? On my watch?" He handed the folder back like it offended him. Not happening. Something passed across the woman's face then. Not anger, not fear, disappointment. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I advise you to contact your duty officer." Rourke smiled. The wrong kind. "Ma'am, you're on a secure installation with falsified credentials. That makes you a potential threat." Mercer shifted his weight. His training screamed that something was wrong, not procedurally, but morally. The woman hadn't moved an inch closer, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't tried to intimidate anyone. She simply stood there. Rourke turned to the MPs. "Detain her. Full intake. Search per regulation." The word search landed heavy. The woman didn't resist as they guided her toward the holding facility. As she passed Mercer, she stopped briefly. "Private," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "Remember this moment." Then she kept walking. Mercer stood frozen, rifle cold against his chest, watching as the gate swallowed her whole. He didn't know why his hands were shaking, but somewhere deep inside, something he'd sworn to protect had just been crossed, and Fort Halcyon was about to find out exactly who it had just tried to break. The holding facility at Fort Halcyon sat half buried into the ground, like a bunker that didn't want to be remembered. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights that hummed with age. The kind of place designed to erase individuality and replace it with compliance. Private Mercer watched from the corridor as the woman was escorted inside. Regulation dictated he shouldn't be here. Curiosity, and something closer to conscience, kept his feet planted. Staff Sergeant Rourke strode ahead of the group, keys jangling, authority heavy on his shoulders. He liked this part. Intake meant control. Intake meant leverage. "Processing room," he ordered. The MPs guided the woman forward. Her hands were uncuffed, her pace unhurried. She looked around once, not searching for exits, not gauging threats. She was memorizing. That, Mercer realized, was not fear. Inside the processing room, the air smelled of disinfectant and old sweat. A camera blinked red in the corner, a metal table, a bench bolted to the floor. Rourke leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Name," he said. "Elaine Carter," the woman replied. No hesitation. Occupation, federal service. Rourke smirked. "That's vague." "So is your authority," she said calmly. The room went quiet. One of the MPs shifted uncomfortably. Rourke straightened. "You're in no position to be clever." She met his stare. "Neither are you." Rourke turned sharply to the MPs. "Proceed with intake search. Full compliance." The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mercer's chest tightened. He'd studied the regulations. He knew what full meant. He also knew when it crossed from procedure into humiliation. The woman removed her jacket without being told, folded it neatly, set it on the bench. Her movements were precise, economical, like someone used to following orders, but only lawful ones. She paused, then looked directly at Rourke. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "this is your final opportunity to call your duty officer." Rourke laughed. "You don't get to make recommendations anymore." He nodded to the MPs. Mercer felt his stomach drop. The search was conducted by the book, technically. Gloves, checklists, no unnecessary words. But the room felt wrong. Too eager, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pretended dignity while stripping it away. The woman endured it without protest. She stared straight ahead, breathing slow and measured. Mercer noticed her hands, calloused in places civilians didn't have calluses. Old scars along the knuckles. A faint mark at the wrist where a watch had been worn for years, then removed. Time passed. When it was done, the MP stepped back, unsettled. "Nothing," he said. "No weapons, no devices." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Then she waits," he snapped. "Isolation cell." Mercer spoke before he could stop himself. "Staff Sergeant, permission to speak?" Rourke turned, eyes cold. Denied. The woman was escorted out. As she passed Mercer again, she looked at him. Not with gratitude, not with accusation, with resolve. "You did nothing wrong," she said softly. "Yet." Then the door closed behind her. Mercer stood alone in the processing room, the hum of the lights louder than before. His pulse thudded in his ears. Something wasn't adding up. No panic, no lies, no resistance, only warnings. And somewhere above them, in offices with flags and sealed briefcases, a clock had started ticking. Rourke didn't hear it. But Mercer did. Isolation at Fort Halcyon was not a room. It was an absence. Concrete walls swallowed sound. The light above the cell stayed on at all hours, bleaching time into a single, endless moment. The woman, Elaine Carter, according to intake, sat on the narrow bench with her hands folded, spine straight, boots aligned beneath her knees. She had not asked for water. She had not asked for a phone call. She had not asked for a lawyer. That unsettled the guards more than any outburst would have. Down the corridor, Private Mercer stood his assigned watch, rifle slung, eyes forward. He had been rotated to this post by Rourke himself, an act that felt less like routine and more like containment. Keep the quiet one quiet. Mercer's thoughts wouldn't settle. He replayed the intake in his mind, frame by frame, like footage slowed down to expose what the eye usually missed. The woman's posture, her economy of motion, the way she had warned Rourke, not threatened, not begged, advised. That wasn't civilian behavior. At 02:17 hours, the silence broke. Boots. Fast. Purposeful. A junior officer, Lieutenant Harris, duty operations, rounded the corner, tablet in hand, brow furrowed. "Who's in isolation?" Harris asked. Mercer answered crisply. "Civilian detainee, sir, pending verification." Harris nodded, then hesitated. "Civilian?" He glanced at the cell door. "She's been very calm." "Yes, sir." Harris leaned closer to the small reinforced window. The woman did not look up. Something about that disturbed him. "Where's Staff Sergeant Rourke?" "Security office, sir." Harris exhaled slowly. "I need the intake file." Mercer handed over the clipboard. Harris skimmed it, frown deepening with each line. "No ID," Harris murmured. "Restricted document, audit authority?" He looked up. "Did anyone run the signature?" Mercer shook his head. "Staff Sergeant said it wasn't necessary." That was the moment. The exact moment when the air shifted. Harris straightened. It's always necessary. He stepped away, thumb already moving on his tablet. In the cell, the woman finally lifted her eyes, not toward Harris, but toward Mercer. Just for a second. She nodded. Not approval. Acknowledgement. Minutes later, the hallway buzzed with restrained urgency. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed too quickly. Words like verification, chain, and command review floated through the air in hushed tones. Rourke emerged from the security office, irritation written across his face. "What's going on?" he demanded. Harris met him squarely. "Sir, I contacted Brigade. They're escalating." Rourke's jaw clenched. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that someone with that level of audit authority doesn't travel without clearance, unless they're testing us." Rourke scoffed. "Testing us? She's a nobody." Harris's voice dropped. "Sir, Brigade just asked for the detainee's fingerprints." The corridor went very still. Rourke laughed once, sharp and humorless. "So what?" Harris swallowed. "They didn't ask who she was." He turned the tablet so Rourke could see the screen. "They asked if we'd already recognized her." The color drained from Rourke's face. Inside the cell, the woman closed her eyes, breathing slow and even, as if listening to a distant rhythm only she could hear. Somewhere far beyond Fort Halcyon, a secure database finished its search, and the name Elaine Carter vanished, replaced by something far heavier. The call came down the line without warning, not a ringtone, not a chime. A hard, direct connection that cut through Fort Halcyon's internal network like a blade. At 0302 hours, every monitor in the security office froze, then went black, then came back online, bearing a single line of text in white against blue. "Stand fast. Senior Command assuming control." Lieutenant Harris stared at the screen, pulse hammering. Staff Sergeant Rourke took a step back, as if the words themselves had physical mass. "That's not possible," he muttered. "That's not—" The door opened. 2 officers entered, Navy uniforms, no patches displayed, no weapons visible. Their posture alone cleared the room. Behind them walked a woman in a dark suit, silver hair cropped short, eyes sharp as cut glass. She did not raise her voice. "Where is she?" No one answered. The woman turned slowly, gaze settling on Rourke. "I asked a question, Sergeant." Rourke swallowed. "Isolation. Corridor C." The woman nodded once. "You will escort us." Immediately, as they moved, alarms did not sound. No troops scrambled. That was the most frightening part. When power truly shifts, it does so quietly. The isolation corridor felt narrower than before. The lights seemed harsher. Private Mercer stood at attention as the group approached, heart pounding so hard he was certain it would betray him. The suited woman stopped in front of him. "Name," she said. "Private First Class Daniel Mercer, ma'am." She studied him for a long second. "Did you follow orders tonight?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you question them?" Mercer hesitated. "Just enough, yes, ma'am." She nodded. "Good." She turned to the cell door. "Open it." The MP's hand shook as he keyed the lock. The door slid open with a low mechanical sigh. Inside, the woman stood smoothly, as if she had never been confined at all. Her jacket was returned, her posture unchanged, her eyes clear. The suited woman stepped forward and came to attention. So did the Navy officers. So did Lieutenant Harris. So did Mercer, without thinking, without hesitation. Rourke did not. The woman in the cell raised a hand slightly. "At ease," she said. Her voice carried command, not volume. The suited woman spoke. "Admiral Elaine Carter, United States Navy. Clearance verified. Identity confirmed." The words landed like ordnance. Rourke's knees buckled. He caught himself on the wall. Admiral Carter turned to him calmly. "You ordered a search," she said. "You denied escalation. You dismissed lawful advisement." Rourke opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She did not shout. She did not threaten. "You will be relieved of duty pending investigation," she continued. "Effective immediately." She looked past him, to Mercer. "Private." "Yes, ma'am." "You stood when it mattered." Mercer's throat tightened. "I wasn't sure, ma'am." Admiral Carter allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Courage rarely is. She turned to the corridor. to the base beyond it. Fort Halcyon failed tonight, she said evenly. But it will learn. As senior command moved in, as radios crackled and authority realigned itself, Mercer felt something settle inside him. The system had bent, but it had not broken. And truth, when it finally arrived, did not need to announce itself. It simply took its place. Dawn came slowly to Fort Halcyon, not with color, but with clarity. By over 600 hours, the base was no longer pretending the night hadn't happened. Offices were lit. Senior NCOs stood in tight clusters. Phones rang with the careful tone reserved for conversations that would be remembered. Staff Sergeant Colin Rourke sat alone in a small administrative room, hands folded, staring at a wall he had never noticed before. His rank had been stripped from his chest. Not ceremonially, efficiently, a pen stroke, a signature. Accountability did not need spectacle. Across the installation, quiet investigations began, reviews of logs, cameras, decisions. Not a witch hunt, a reckoning. And at the center of it all, Admiral Elaine Carter stood in the base command briefing room, jacket buttoned, posture composed, eyes steady. She had declined rest, declined ceremony, declined apology. She had requested only one thing: bring me the private from the gate. Private First Class, Daniel Mercer entered the room with his spine straight and his pulse racing. He had stood in formation before. He had never stood in front of this much authority. Admiral Carter dismissed the others with a glance. "Sit," she said. Mercer sat. She studied him for a moment, not as a superior weighing a subordinate, but as a leader measuring character. "You followed the rules," she said, "and you listened to your conscience." Mercer chose his words carefully. "I didn't know who you were, ma'am. I know," she replied. "That's why this matters." She leaned back slightly. "There will be reports," she continued. "Investigations. Some careers will end, others will change course." Her voice softened, just a fraction. "But institutions don't survive on paperwork alone." She looked directly at him. "They survive on people who know when obedience ends and duty begins." Mercer swallowed. "Ma'am, were we supposed to fail?" Admiral Carter considered the question. "No," she said, "but we were supposed to be tested." She stood, signaling the end. "Go back to your post, Private, and remember, rank does not make you honorable. Choices do." Mercer came to attention, saluted, and left the room with something heavier than fear in his chest. Responsibility. By mid-morning, Admiral Carter was gone. No press release, no photographs, no speech. Just a secure vehicle leaving the base the way it had arrived, alone. Fort Halcyon returned to routine. Flags snapped in the wind. Boots struck pavement. Orders were given and followed. But something had changed. Guards looked twice before dismissing a voice. NCOs paused before forcing compliance. Officers asked one more question than they used to, and Private Mercer, standing once again at Checkpoint Charlie, understood something that could not be taught in training. Power reveals itself in how it treats the powerless. Authority proves itself in restraint, and courage is often silent until it is needed most. As the sun climbed higher, the base stood firm, not because it was flawless, but because, when tested in the dark, truth had held. In every uniformed service, there will be moments when the rules are clear, but what is right is not. In those moments, character becomes the final authority. Titles can be hidden, power can be disguised, but integrity, once tested, always reveals who we truly are. That is what holds an institution together. Not fear, not force, but the quiet courage to choose rightly, especially when no one is watching.